Hello, my name is Dan Scappon, and this is the Top 5 Weekly. This week, we're going to be discussing films related to either drug trafficking or drug trade or drug abuse or drug addiction or anything like that based on American Made, a film starring Tom Cruise where he is uh, involved in the drug trade back from countries like Mexico and Nicaragua and places like that. So, based on that, we've decided to do the drug trade, trafficking, addiction this week on the Top 5 Weekly. And once again, with me is Mr. Andrew Cabral. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be back here, and we are talking drug movies this week. That's why I call them drug movies. And it's very interesting if you go back and look at the history of drugs in movies. They've been around for decades. It seems to be a constant um, element in a lot of films, going back decades and decades. And it's very interesting how that's still a thing. Like Dan is going to be talking about American Made, which is talks about drugs from about 25 or 30 years ago, that whole drug trafficking thing. But it's interesting how people have always been utilizing drugs in different ways now for decades, and movies always tend to shine a light on that. I just find that very interesting.
Well, it's such a tragic thing in films, and movies love tragedy, and drugs can bring that tragic element, whether it be getting arrested, getting killed, getting into a treatment center, or all different things. It can hurt your family members, it can hurt your friends. So there's a lot of tragedy involved with drug abuse or drug trade or drug addiction or drug trafficking. So that's why the drugs seem to always be an element in films. And like you said, there are quite a few movies involving drugs in one form or another. So with that being said, Andrew, let's get this started. And what is your number 5 drug-related film?
My number 5 is a film that I'm pretty sure many people are aware of. Even if you haven't seen it, it is such an iconic film in pop culture, and that is Scarface from 1983, directed by Brian De Palma and starring Al Pacino in one of his most iconic roles. I would say outside of the Godfather movies, this film is the one people constantly know him from. I mean, I was quoting this movie uh, when I was a little kid, years before I saw this movie or knew what it was about. It just people would use it, people would spoof it in movies, and all kind of stuff. But this is a film that, like I said, directed by Brian De Palma. It is, in fact, a remake of a film that came out in 1932 of the same name, but that was a much different type of movie. That movie was kind of a quasi look at um, American gangsters at the time. It really was kind of a look at someone like Al Capone and things like that. That film was directed by Howard Hawks. It's a cool film to go back and look at, especially for the controversy it had around it when it came out, being so violent and stuff like that. But the one starring Al Pacino, I'm pretty sure many of you know this. He plays the character of Tony Montana, or Tony Montana, sorry, mispronunciation. And he is someone who essentially goes from rags to riches. The film is basically a very weird version of the American dream, going from nothing and becoming something. And he gets involved in the drug business, specifically cocaine, and he deals with like the cocaine trade from South America, and he takes over a business, and he is a very interesting character in the sense that he is his own worst enemy. This is one of the films that, if you ever hear the term, uh, uh, don't don't smoke your own supply or something like that.
Get
It's
high
like,
on your own supply.
yeah, don't get high on your own supply. And basically, that is essentially his downfall because he abuses cocaine in this movie so much. I mean, there's famous clips of him with just mounds of cocaine in front of him and him just like, yeah, dumping his face into it. And the film also stars people like Stephen Bauer, Michelle Pfeiffer, Mary Elizabeth Mastro Antonio plays his sister, who he has a very weird protective relationship over. Robert Loggia's in the film. F. Murray Abraham is in the film. There's a lot of people in here that you're going to recognize and know. But this film has one of the most iconic endings of any film in the last, 35, 40 years. Say hello to my little friend and all this kind of stuff. It's a very interesting movie of the classic rise and fall of a character. That's kind of the way I view the film. Is it over the top? Is there a lot of elements with Al Pacino that's kind of far out there? Yes, but is ultimately a tragic story of a character who is responsible for his own demise.
Yeah, absolutely. Great choice. Putting Scarface on your list. My number 5, I chose to go with a little film from 2014. This isn't about people doing drugs. This just happens to be a kid who happens to be in the wrong place, who happens to end up with a backpack, who happens to end up with a brick of drugs. And he is trying to figure out what to do with this drugs, how he can make money on it, how he can get success based on this drugs, and also try to stay out of getting in trouble from the people that he ended up getting the brick of drugs from. And that film is 2014's Dope. And it stars a young man by the name of Shameik Moore, and also Tony Ravioli. You might remember him from a couple of famous roles in Spider-Man Homecoming and Grand Budapest Hotel. Kiersey Clements. It's got a little cameo from Forrest Whitaker in there. It's got Zoe Kravitz. But this is an absolute surprise hit in 2014. Nobody saw this film coming. Nobody knew anything about this. But once it came and it got out there, everybody was raving about Dope. And that's what this kid finds. That he goes to a party and he ends up getting his backpack with his brick of dope in it. And he's trying to figure out how to, make some money off of it and be successful and find a way. He wants to be a musician. He's trying to maneuver getting rid of this brick of dope, or whatever you want to call it, to help himself be successful. It's a really, really good film. It just happens to have that one little subplot about drugs that I think really is the MacGuffin of the entire film. You always hear us talk about MacGuffin on the Top 5 Weekly or the 52 Must-See Movies. Well, the dope in this case is the MacGuffin in the film, because it moves the entire plot of the film forwards. So that's why I had number 5. I have Dope. It's in the name of. I mean, you just can't. I love the name of the film. It's Dope. I mean, it's dope can be used as obviously drugs, or it can be used as like a kind of metaphor for being like, yeah, you're dope, you're cool, you're awesome, you're a good guy, you're dope, But in this case, it's drugs. And I'm sure you saw Dope, right, Andy?
I did see Dope, and I thought it was a great indie gem of a movie. There's a very powerful sequence towards the end of the movie, because it is about a kid who is trying to be good. Like, he's trying to get out of the economic climate in which he lives in, and he's unique and he is different than the circumstances in which that surrounds him. And yeah, dope has a double meaning. It could mean cool, or or it could mean, it's both slang for cool and slang for drugs. So it's very interesting how the film uses it both ways.
All right, what's your number 4, Andrew?
But my number 4 is a film that is directed by one of my favorites of all time. I've referenced his name so many times, and that is Steven Soderbergh's Traffic. This film came out in the year 2000, and it was nominated for 5 Oscars, winning 4 out of 5, but not taking home the big prize of Best Picture. That year, I believe, was Gladiator by Ridley Scott. It's very interesting how Traffic won kind of the major award you're supposed to win Best Picture, but it didn't. But this film is all about the kind of contemporary modern war on drugs from the United States government perspective. This film is a series of a series of 4 timelines that are in it. In one timeline, there is Michael Douglas is dealing with being both a a not quite a politician. I believe he is a judge, but he's also dealing with the fact that his daughter becomes addicted to crack cocaine. And there's another one with Catherine Zeta-Jones, whose husband was a drug trafficker, and now DEA is all over that situation. And there's another one that deals with like the Mexican government and corruption there. And there's also another one that deals with something else that I can't quite remember, but it's a series of vignettes essentially. There's some crossover between the three, but the main through line is they're all dealing with drugs on a certain level. You know what I mean? And it's a great film. It's one of Steven Soderbergh's best, in my opinion, maybe my favorite from him. But like I said, this film stars a lot of people you're aware of: Benicio del Toro, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Michael Douglas, Don Cheadle. It's a great, great film, great screenplay, and by Stephen Gaghan, and it's one that a lot of I didn't see on a lot of lists when I went to do research for this film. When I typed, best drug movies into the Google search, this film never came up, and I was like, why isn't this film coming up? I think it's one of the best drug movies of all time, and I've always really, really liked it. So I was just surprised by that. But yeah, Traffic is my number 4. I highly recommend checking it out. It's Steven Soderbergh at a time when he was probably at his best, that late 90s, early 2000s, when he was just chugging out movie after movie. I mean, this was the same year he had 2 pictures nominated for Best Picture at the Oscar. It was this film, Traffic, as well as Aaron Brockovich. So he was just at the height of his talent.
Absolutely agree. I could not say it any better. What you said about Traffic. My number 4, I chose to go with another a smaller film that a lot of people may not know about. It also stars Benicio del Toro, but it also stars Halle Berry and David Duchovny, and it's called Things We Lost in the Fire. Things We Lost in the Fire is about a family. Halle Berry plays the wife, and David Duchovny plays the husband, and the husband gets involved in a domestic dispute between a man and his wife, and he gets shot. And so we're dealing with that in the past. Then in the present, we're dealing with Brian's, played by David Duchovny's, funeral, where Halle Berry forgets she has to invite his best friend. We see some backstory in David Duchovny's best friend. His name is Jerry Sunbold. Jerry Sunbold, and that's the Benicio del Toro character in the film. Now he's living in like a hovel in like some kind of a I don't know what you would call it, some kind of like work release place, and this hovel is, he has to do some work and he gets the place to stay, but he's a recovering drug addict. And so when she invites him to the wedding, she talks to him. Halle Berry talks to him, and she eventually said, hey, we just had to redo our garage because we had a fire. And so he ends up moving into her garage, and he kind of befriends her kids and so forth. But then she kind of gets suspicious, is like, what, you're never going to replace Brian, and you're not these kids' father. And that sends Jerry back into a spiral of drug addiction. And he goes and takes a bunch of silverware and stuff from her house, and he goes and buys some drugs, and he gets high, and he ends up getting messed up, and he ends up going back into the life of a drug addicted man, which is, if you've ever seen someone that's addicted to drugs and who's on drugs and who's just been doing drugs, I think Benicio del Toro really captures what that's like, especially the part where he's trying to come off the drugs and they're trying to get him down from being high and all that stuff. and it's a really some dramatic scenes. She has to get her brother to stay with him, and he really is having a rough time getting out of being addicted. He was going to a meeting and talking about how he was such and such many days clean, and of course we know that he ended up going back to drugs in the film. But there was a girl named played by Allison Lohman, and she is somebody that is trying to help him along with the Halle Berry character. This film is directed by Susan Baer, and I'll tell you what, if you have never seen Things We Lost in the Fire, it is a really great little small indie film that has a message about drug addiction and family and loss and a lot of things like that. So it's a film that when I saw it, it really hit me hard because I just felt really strongly for the character of Jerry Sunvale or Sunbold or whatever his name is. I think it's Jerry Sunbold. And I'm a big Benicio del Toro fan, and he really, really seemed to embody this character, in my opinion. So that's why I had Things We Lost in the Fire as number 4 on my list. All right, Andrew, what is your number 3?
My number 3 is an iconic, almost cult film, but I think it's become more mainstream over time, and that is Trainspotting, directed by Danny Boyle from 1996, starring Ewan McGregor, Christopher Eccleston, a couple of other actors. Johnny Lee Miller, Kevin McKidd, Robert Carlyle's in the film, Kelly MacDonald, and this was all before anyone really knew who any of these people were. Ewan McGregor hadn't done any of the Star Wars movies yet. He hadn't become a mainstream actor in any way, and this was only Danny Boyle's second film, so he was a relative unknown. His first film was Shallow Grave that came out right before this, also starring Ewan McGregor. And this film is most famously known for being a heavily utilization of drugs in this movie. Ewan McGregor and his friends are from Edinburgh, Scotland. Heavy accents in this film, so you may want to watch this movie with subtitles on. It's some of the heaviest Scottish accents I've ever seen in a movie, but they are basically just delinquents, if you will. They're not juvenile delinquents. They're kind of people in their 20s, if you will, or their early 20s, and they're just kind of drug users and delinquents in a way that they just kind of rob people. They steal stuff to pay for their drug habits, basically. Sometimes they just buy drugs and any kind of drug they can get their hands on, whether it is stealing prescription drugs from a pharmacy or buying heroin from their local dealer, where they all sit in a room and just do heroin with one another. And the drug trip sequences in this film are extremely well done. You feel as if you're going on this drug trip with them. And this is where Danny Boyle really started to hone his abilities as a director and utilize his unique stylization when it came to special effects and camera angles and editing and all this kind of stuff. This film is really interesting from that perspective. I would dare say that this is a film that doesn't have much of a solid plot throughout. You're just following the Ewan McGregor character, who is at the center of this film, and he's going through a bit of a character journey, but it's not very strong. You know what I mean? The plot's not so much the reason why you watch this movie. It's the style. The style is very, very strong. But Ewan McGregor's character is trying to get away from doing these drugs. He's trying to get away from doing all of the influences that are around him. And he tries, but you can't quite give it up. That's kind of the hold that drugs have over people. You see that even over a substantial amount of time, it's so easy to fall back into it. It's so easy to fall back in with that crowd, fall back into the drug use. And the film also portrays drugs in, I find, to be a unique way. It shows you how bad they can be. Definitely, it's terrible. The consequences are definitely there, but the film also shows you that this high that you get can be so unique and so great that it's almost worth all of those terrible consequences. And the film kind of toes the line between the both, and also it's a social commentary on people who have no other things going for them in their lives but the drug use. They fall back on it. They rely on it to get some type of joy in life. They can't really get that type of joy or that type of satisfaction anywhere else. So it's a great film. Highly recommend checking it out. Danny Boyle is one of the most unique directors, certainly one of my favorites, and he's definitely worth checking out his films. In progressive, like check out Shallow Grave, then Train Spotting, and then move forward. He's done a bunch of different genres, so I highly recommend all of his movies.
Yeah, definitely agree. Great choice, Train Spotting. I got the poster of Train Spotting 2 behind me right there.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. I have number 3 is a film that you already mentioned as your number 5. I have Scarface. I don't know what else I could say about this film. You have already said it's just one of the iconic films of the last 30 years. I mean, it made T-shirts, and gangsters have basically adopted this film as like their way of doing things. And you know, if gangsters are you know, hoods and, you know, just troublemakers and bad people are adopting Scarface as their mantra, you know, it's got to be a film about some bad people, because these guys don't just put My Little Pony on their shirts, or they don't want to dress like that. They want to be tough guys. They want to act like they're a macho, big shot guy. And so Scarface had like a whole new life in the gangster world years after the film came out. And it came out in the early 80s, like 1981. And Al Pacino, like you said, one of his iconic roles, and clearly one of the most notable films about drugs and trading drugs and that sort of things. And you deal with gangsters in Miami and that sort of stuff. So it is a film that it has been lauded for many years. And like you said, the ending is one of the most iconic endings of all films, and one of the greatest quotes of all time. Say hello to my little friend. You know, I mean, I could do it the way he did it, but I'm not really in the mood to do that right now. But I do a good impersonation of Al Pacino doing that scene. But yeah, I had Scarface at number 3. You know, you have to. I think it's a film you would have to have on your list as one of the all-time great films involving drugs. With that being said, American-made, Tom Cruise plays Barry Seal. He's basically a pilot. Who's kind of going through his life, and you kind of see that at the beginning of the film, where he's just kind of, welcome to Seattle, welcome to Albuquerque, welcome to Utah, welcome to. He kind of is kind of bored with his life. You know, he's kind of got some bills. He's got a family that you know, they're not necessarily doing great. And he gets approached by Donald Gleason, and I guess he was doing something with like a little side deal where he was selling Cuban cigars, and says, well, would you like to hit the big time? Would you like to work for the CIA and really make a difference? And he's like, all right, sure. So he starts doing some things for the CIA involving the Condinistas in Nicaragua, and then that gets him involved with flying drugs back and forth from Mexico to Arkansas. He ends up moving because of the high pressure of what he was doing. He ends up moving from where he lives to a little town in Arkansas called Mena, Arkansas, where there's 2,000 acres, a beautiful house. But the most notable thing about the land is it's got its own airport. It's got its own like runway, so he could fly in and out of Mena, Arkansas, and fly to Mexico and fly to Nicaragua. But eventually I keep saying Jerry, I meant Barry Seal gets over his head, because this is what happens when you're dealing with trying to start wars in foreign country and dealing with drug dealers and cartels in Mexico. You eventually get over your head, and everybody and their brother, the NR, I mean the National Drug Enforcement Agency, the FBI, everybody's coming down on Barry. But he thinks he's doing things he thinks he's doing things what he's supposed to be doing because he's working for the CIA. So eventually he has to take a plea bargain. He takes some probationary time. But when you do the bad guys wrong, the bad guys are going to come and get you eventually. And so eventually Barry kind of gets his, and I feel bad for him because he thought he was doing things for the government. He thought he was working for the government, and the government was telling him this is what he had to do, and he wasn't trying to be anything that he wasn't supposed to be. But the bad guys, they didn't look at it like that. You work for them and you get caught, or you turn state's evidence or whatever it is, they're going to come and get you eventually. But there's a great framing sequence. How they frame the film is he's in like different hotel rooms and he's recording. He's basically telling his story into VHS cassettes. And that's how we end up getting this story told to us, by him talking into a VHS recorder. And so I'm guessing that's what they end up finding to turn this, and then turn those transcripts into a movie script. And that's how we get the movie American Made. So, I mean, I really enjoyed American Made. I thought, well, I like Tom Cruise in The Mummy, but that's kind of a little bit different than the things he's used to doing. I think this is more up his alley, Tom Cruise. I think that the movie star Tom Cruise is back in full force with American Made. So I really enjoyed it. Have you seen American Made yet?
I did not see American Made this week, Dan. I saw Battle of the Sexes instead. And that's, of course, a much different movie. Both based on true events, though, that happened in the past, but much different films. And yeah, I can understand the perspective in which you're coming from. That, yeah, Tom Cruise is more in line with films like this than I would say The Mummy. You know what I mean? I think he does. He's a movie star first and foremost. We all know his name. People know his image. But he still, I think, is limited by, certain abilities. I think he's more suited for something like American Made than The Mummy. And since both movies have come out now, people can judge him, judge that the way they want it to be. You know what I mean?
He had pretty much success with Edge of Tomorrow with Doug Liman. So he kind of returns to collaborate with Doug Liman on American Made. And obviously they work well together because there's two films, and I think they both were pretty good of a collaboration for these guys.
Edge of Tomorrow was a surprise for many people, a very pleasant surprise, because they didn't think that a movie like that with Tom Cruise could be as great as it was. I think a lot of that had to do with the story and the Doug Liman being a very solid director. And it's very interesting if you look at something like The Mummy, which is also a big budgeted, fantasy movie or with big, like, out of this world type things. It doesn't quite work as well as Edge of Tomorrow. You know what I mean? No. It doesn't. It really depends on the situation.
Yep. All right. So getting back to our list, and you're at number 2 now, Andrew.
I am at number 2, and for my number 2, I'm going with a film that I first got into many, many years ago, and it was a film that was always recommended to me, or I always saw it on lists, and that is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, directed by Terry Gilliam, came out in 1998, starring Johnny Depp and, what do you know, Benicio del Toro, our old friend, is back again in another movie. He seems to pop up in these drug movies a lot, apparently. And this film is based on the Hunter S. Thompson book. Hunter S. Thompson was this kind of eccentric journalist, intellectual guy. He was a very interesting person. Definitely do some research into him. I believe he wrote for Rolling Stone magazine back in the day, back in the 70s, and that's kind of where this story kind of takes place is that he went on a trip with his lawyer, who was portrayed by Benicio del Toro in this film, and they went to cover this race, if you will, for whatever paper, I believe it was Rolling Stone, he was writing for at the time. And it was basically just an excuse to go on a drug-filled vacation in Las Vegas. And what you see in this film is a man who goes on acid trip over acid trip, incoherent narration, just going on these wild psychedelic adventures. And the special effects in this movie are crazy. The story is crazy. Everything about this movie is just insane. And I think it's so amazing that this film was made and is there and we can watch it. And Terry Gilliam is one of those directors who I don't think a lot of people know. He is one of the most visually unique directors I think we've ever seen, at least in the last 30 to 40 years. He's done films like Brazil is another one that's one of my favorites of his, and he just directs the heck out of this movie. And this was when Johnny Depp was at his best. In the 90s, Johnny Depp was doing movie after movie. He was a big name star, and he also became great friends with Hunter S. Thompson, so he really wanted to do this film properly. He really wanted to capture the Hunter S. Thompson character, and he did. And there's so many iconic, weird scenes in this movie. I've always loved it. It's always been one of my favorite movies, and I can't explain to people why I love it so much or why they should really see it, other than you will never see another movie quite like this. It is an experience to behold, and I've always liked it, and I've always recommended it to people. So yeah, that's my number 2, just because this whole movie is basically one drug trip after another.
Yeah, I saw it years and years ago, and even though I own a copy of it, it didn't resonate with me. Even though I like Johnny Depp and I'm a big fan of Benicio del Toro, it just didn't resonate with me. I thought that the whole drug-filled rage type of thing was just too much for me to just, I'm like, I just couldn't, yeah. I couldn't watch it. It was just like, all right, this is enough for this.
Yeah, there's a plot in the movie, but it's just like going from place to place doing drugs, doing as much drugs as possible, and there's also like a narration throughout with Johnny Depp. It's definitely more of a cult movie, I'll say that, most definitely.
Yeah, the main thing is they're in a hotel room, and that's when it really gets out of hand. In Las Vegas, they're in a hotel room in Las Vegas, and it just gets really, really out of hand. And Johnny Depp actually did 2 movies about Hunter S. Thompson. Second one came out a couple of years ago. I can't think of the name of it right now.
Oh, it was the Rum Diaries?
Yeah, the Rum Diaries. That's
I saw that. Yeah,
when he lived in Cuba or something like that.
Yeah. That was a different time in Hunter S. Thompson's life.
Yeah, he had an interesting life. Hunter S. Thompson did. But my number 2 is this is where that. I said, it's going to be drug trafficking, drug addiction, drug trade, drug abuse. I mean, all different aspects of drug. Well, this film has to do with drug trade, and it's one of the most famous films about a drug trade gone wrong. And it's one of my favorites. It was my number 1 film when we did car chases, and that's The French Connection. You have these Frenchmen who are bringing a car from France over to the United States, but we don't know what's in the car. Well, we come to find out it's heroin. There's heroin in this car, and the whole movie is Jimmy Popeye Doyle, played by Gene Hackman, and Roy Schneider. They figure something up with this guy in a nightclub. There's something about this guy. He's passing around too many bills. He's tipping too good. There's something about this guy. And well, we find out that he's got a deal. He's got a big drug deal with this Frenchman that could be millions and millions of dollars in heroin. but they can't put their finger on what's going on, and where the trade is going to go down. And it's got a great car chase where Gene Hackman's driving a car and he's tracing a chain. He's chasing a train. He's chasing a train because one of the guys, the Frenchman hitman who tried to kill him, is on a train in the metro in New York. And it's a great, great car chase. You rarely see car chases where the car is chasing a train. I think this is the only time is that. And this is a true story. This actually happened. And what I like about this film, one of the things I like, it's filmed on the streets of New York City during basically the time that this happened, the 70s. And everything about this film is authentic. The cars, the clothes, the train, the chases, the people. Some of these scenes where Gene Hackman's in this car chasing the train, he actually hits real cars. Some of the things, he almost hits this lady, has to dodge out of the way of this lady in her carriage and hits a bunch of garbage cans and stuff. This stuff actually happened while they're filming the scene. They never changed, they never cut, they never edited any of this stuff out. This all happened while they were filming the movie, some of these scenes. And this is a true story. And so Jimmy Popeye Doyle is a real guy, was a real detective in New York City, wasn't the nicest guy. He didn't get along with his co-workers. He didn't get along with a lot of people, obviously, when you watch the film. But the main through line throughout the film, once again, we'll use MacGuffin. This Lincoln was basically in the MacGuffin of the film that got us from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, because what was inside the Lincoln? Packs of heroin that they were going to try to trade for millions and millions of dollars. So that's how I had the French Connection on there as a drug movie.
Yeah, I saw that on a lot of lists, and I was like, yeah, I guess it is. Yeah, that heroin. Yeah, what Dan is saying is true. That scene where where they're driving, that car chase scene, and they have to avoid that woman and hit the trash. Yeah, that wasn't staged. That actually happened. I think they didn't have the permits to actually shoot the scene, so they basically could only do it in like one take or so. And yeah, William Friedkin is one of my favorite people in like really kind of movie history, because he's very approachable, and he talks about all the stuff he did while shooting his movies. And yeah, the story of shooting the French Connection is incredible. You can learn all about it on the special features on the DVD and the Blu-ray. It's fascinating. Yeah, so going to my number one is a film that I saw about 10 years ago in the early days of me really getting into movies, and it's a film that kind of blew me away at the time. It's a film that I almost haven't seen since, because it was so traumatic to me watching it at a young age of about 20 years old. I was watching it. And granted, 20 isn't the youngest of impressionable ages, but never having actually seen a movie quite like this, or knowing that movies could be this graphic, it was traumatic to me. And that is Requiem for a Dream, directed by Darren Aronofsky, came out in the year 2000. And I basically call this the greatest anti-drug movie ever made, because after watching this movie, you never want to do a hard drug ever. Heroin, cocaine, anything like that. This movie shows that it will destroy your life. And not only destroy your life like, oh, you'll get a drug addiction. No, it will send you down a path of literally hell on earth, basically. Personal hell on earth. And this film is incredible. Darren Aronofsky recently came out with the movie Mother, which a lot of people are talking about, but he's been making movies that cerebral pretty much his entire career. And just go back to this movie, Requiem for a Dream, and it is as disturbing, as thought-provoking, and as just mind-blowing a movie. And this film stars Ellen Burstyn, Jared Leto, Jennifer Connelly, Marlon Wayans. And I'm always shocked that Marlon Wayans never did anything as great or as dramatic as this film in his career post this movie. He kind of just drifted back to doing kind of spoof comedy movies and stand-up comedy and stuff like that. But in this film, it is the best of his career. Marlon Wayans, you will never find him doing a better performance than in this film. Of course, Jared Leto, I think a lot of people are more familiar with. He is a famous musician now. He is also an Oscar winner now for his role in Dallas Buyers Club. Coincidentally, also a role that dealt with the use of drugs, specifically heroin, I believe, which in this film he uses heavily. Ellen Burstyn, who is an actress who's been around for decades, I believe she is also an Oscar winner as well, and she gets addicted to diet pills in this film. Diet pills, which is something you can buy over the counter at pharmacies and nutrition places and stuff like that, and it shows that those aren't healthy for you in any way. Those can become addicting. You know, they're kind of a substitute for speed or something like that, and they become an hallucinogen. But yeah, this film is just incredible. Jennifer Connelly's character gets addicted to, I believe, cocaine to the point where she will literally do anything to get cocaine or get the money to get cocaine, and it shows how you will literally degrade yourself to the point where you would never believe you could. This film is just so powerful. There's a sequence at the end of this film, which basically I consider just a montage of self-destruction, where you see everybody just at their lowest point, and it has that song. I can't remember the song, but it's iconic. They used it so many times in so many different ways in trailers and stuff like that, but it's just haunting. This whole movie is just haunting and traumatic from a drug use perspective. It's one of the, like I said, like most anti-drug movies I've ever seen. I highly recommend checking out if you want to see a movie that is very cerebral and very unforgiving when it comes to drug use. I think it's very modern in that perspective. You know what I mean? A lot of movies tend to glorify drug use, you know, in certain ways. In certain ways, they make it cool or they make it, fashionable or whatever. But no, drug use can be very dark and be very self-destructive.
Yeah, great choice. For when you told me you already had your number one, I didn't think it was Requiem for a Dream, but once you said it, I said, "Wow, that's a no-brainer." You know,
Yeah, it is.
My number one is actually your number four. I had Traffic as number one. I'll tell you what, when I saw this film, it just hit me like a ton of bricks when I first saw it back in 2000. And it was like you said, this is a time where I was really getting into film, and really I was already like really into movies, from westerns and gangster films and holiday films and all kinds of films in this from when I was a kid. But seeing films like, Gladiator and Aaron Brockovich and Shakespeare in Love and so many of these great films in the late 90s and early 2000s that really started showing me how much of a film fan and a film aficionado I was. And Traffic really, I love films that have multiple overlying storylines in it. This had 5 of them, and they all involved drugs. One, like you said, was Michael Douglas was just crowned the drug czar of the United States. He was going to fight drugs. Well, he couldn't even fight drugs in his own house. His daughter was addicted to crack cocaine, like you said, and her and Topher Grace were a couple Catholic school kids, but they were all up in drugs, and one of their buddies died of or almost died of an overdose. And then we had Don Cheadle, who he's basically a detective, a narcotics detective, and he captures Miguel Ferrer, and he's gonna turn state's evidence on this businessman who's the husband of Catherine Zeta-Jones, who's a basically drug dealer in this country, and he deals with drug cartels in Mexico. But then you have a police officer who is involved with the drug cartels in Mexico, who realizes what's going on there. He has to do something about it, and that's Javier Rodriguez, played by Benicio del Toro, and he arguably you know, his best performance of his career. He did win an Oscar for this performance, but I'll tell you what, this guy, I mean, Benicio del Toro can play an alien from outer space, or he could play a drug addicted guy, or he could play a Mexican police officer, and you believe he is this character. That's how good he is of an actor. You know, you have a corrupt lawyer played by Dennis Quaid, and you have so many great actors in this film. I mean, actors that you haven't seen, like Viola Davis is a counselor in here. You don't even you know, oh my God, Viola Davis is in this film. You know, there's some cameos of some people that hadn't become like household names yet, you know, but they're in this film. Steven Soderbergh found something in them and said, okay, well, I'm going to put you in this role, or I'm going to put you in that role, you know. And the girl who plays Michael Douglas's daughter, Erica Christensen, she really didn't do much after this. She's kind of slipped off into obscurity. I think she's in a TV show now, but I hadn't really heard a whole lot from her after Traffic. And that's kind of interesting to see that. But yeah, Traffic, what a phenomenal film. It shows all aspects of drug abuse, drug addiction, drug trade, everything you can think of, every aspect of drugs that you can think of, this film really shows. And that's why it's such a great film, and that's why I had it at my number one. But there's so many other great drug films involving with drugs. Andrew, you got any honorable mentions?
Oh yeah, there are so many. Like I mentioned earlier, off the top of my head, actually not really. I'm looking at a list here. I lied to you all. Blow, Drugstore Cowboy, which is an early Gus Van Sant film starring Matt Dillon. Great film. This movie called Spun, which a lot of you don't know about. The late Brittany Murphy is in that movie, as well as some others you may know. Easy Rider is a movie definitely about drugs. Then you have movies like Up in Smoke, Pineapple Express, which is more about marijuana, and Daisy Confused is marijuana use. Goodfellas deals a lot with cocaine. Shocker there with Martin Scorsese. And there seems to be a lot of other movies with Martin Scorsese and drugs. You know, Wolf of Wall Street, of course. I just want to touch on one more because there's so many. Panic in Needle Park, which is an early Al Pacino film before he became famous, which I believe deals with heroin use as well. And yeah, that's a movie I do recommend.
Yeah, you pretty much took all the ones I was going to say. I got, you know, No Country for Old Men, Training Day.
Yeah.
You know, both have some of their plot has to do with drugs and whatnot. But there are just so many films, and like I said at the beginning, there's so many films that drugs have to do with, and it helps make the film that much more dramatic and that much more real because of the scenarios involving drugs and addiction and abuse and trafficking and trading and so forth. So that's why I chose the subject this week, because I knew we'd have a lot of various films, even though a couple of ours were we crossed over on a couple of our choices. Andrew, thank you for being on once again. Where can you be found?
You can find me on Twitter at Cabzilla06, as well as my YouTube channel, Cabzilla Productions.
And you can find me, Dan Skip Allen, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Pinterest. Also, Andrew, myself, Steven, we do the 52 must-see movies and why they matter, also on this channel, Best Damn Movie Show channel. I'm going to be starting my new show, sports review show, where I'm going to be reviewing sports movies here in a couple weeks in October, called Upon Further Review. And next week, based on Blade Runner 2049, we're going to do Best Cinematographers. So that'll be a fun one, because I know that that's a soft spot with both Steven and Andrew. We love talking about the great cinematographers over the years in film, and there's so many of them right now, including the one that did the cinematography for Blade Runner 2049, Roger Deakins. So because of Roger Deakins' cinematography and Blade Runner 2049, we're going to talk about cinematographers. And so I I just want to say I was trying to get a quote from somebody that may have did a review on some of these movies, but I couldn't get any quotes from any film critics or anything like that. But that's going to be something I'm going to try to look for in the future to quote somebody's review based on some of the films we might be talking about. So I tried. I couldn't get anybody to give me a quote based on their review. So it didn't work out like I wanted to, but I'm going to try to do that in the future. All right. So for Andrew and myself, good night.